Hello, good evening, and warm welcome to all of you at the Thinking Palette platform. In this video, we will talk about that what is the understanding of racism and the recent issues, that is the killing of the George Floyd, and the historical understanding of the practice of racism and ethical understanding of the word racism. And in this way, we are going to cover this topic from GS paper 1 and GS paper 4 perspective. Okay, and this is that the figure represents that whose life is more worth, or whether the USA is a land of free where everyone is enjoying freedom, or a land of unfree where only whites are enjoying the freedom. This will be the part of conclusion, and at the end of the video I will again come to the first slide and will ask to you that whether USA is a land of free or a land of unfree. So now, moving to the meaning of the word racism. What is the racism? Racism is based on ideology of superiority versus inferiority. The certain groups or the members of the certain groups, based on their physical appearances, consider themselves as superior to the other groups, and therefore this word racism is giving rise to certain kind of arrogance, and this arrogance gives rise to xenophobia. And the best example of xenophobia you can see in the case of Hitler in Germany against the Jews. And also you can see the xenophobia in Armenia. And apartheid is also a kind of practice of racism. Okay. So now we will have to understand the racism at the two levels. That is, the very first thing is at a structural level, and second is at individual level. The best example of individual level of racism is that when we see that if you will use certain kind of cream available in the market, you will look fairer than other. Basically, you want to look superior than other. This is also a kind of racism. And also, we all make a certain kind of dehumanizing remark against the particular appearances, that is the black people. This is a kind of a structural reform. And basically structural racism specifies here that not only individual but also a state and its institutions like police is involved in propagating or in practicing the racism. And this is visible in the case of USA, not the recent killing of the George Floyd, but in 2014 also we have seen the killing of Eric Garner and Michael Brown. So now, what is the recent crisis is all about? The recent crisis is nothing but just George Floyd, who was in the market and have gave $20 to the shopkeeper, and later it was found that it was a fake or counterfeit currency. And then that shopkeeper called the police, and the police came and kneeled down the George Floyd, and ultimately he was crying that he cannot breathe. But that dehuman police, I will say, have not heard to the cry of George Floyd, and ultimately he died. So now, what happened after that? The Mr. Trump, known for his Twitter war or known for his words on the Twitter, has made a remark that the people who are protesting against George Floyd are thugs. And one of the remark he made that when looting starts, then shooting starts. Basically, this word is not of his. Basically, this word was used by the police chief in Miami in 1967. One of the friend of that policeman have asked that why there is no any practice of racism in Miami. Then he has replied that when the black people start looting, we start shooting, and therefore you will not see any kind of protest here. Okay, so basically this is the recent crisis, and today the Miami police kneeled down before the protesters, and later they hugged each other, and police have accepted the police brutality and the killing of George Floyd. So now, going into the historical understanding of the racism, the very first thing which you need to understand that the practice of slavery was started from 1789, and the African people from the African continent were transported to the southern part of USA. And now in 1789, only 8 states in the USA where this slavery was practiced. But in 1861, 15 states were practicing slavery. Okay, till now the slavery is being practiced, it was not an issue. But the issue came during the American Civil War, or just before the American Civil War, because American Civil War was started in 1861. So I will go in little bit of history that what happened in 1860 that give rise to the American Civil War, and everything is related as a consequence of American Civil War and the reconstruction phase of Abraham Lincoln. Then after that there was post reconstruction phase where the brutality against the blacks were intensified, and then we know the civil right movement of 1950 started by Martin Luther King. And then what happened in 2008, or aftermath of 2008 financial crisis, the brutality against the black people again gets increased. So this is the basic understanding of the history, and that is from 1860 to 2020. Now, American Civil War. What happened? That the white people in the southern states, that the white people of these southern states were very apprehensive that if Abraham Lincoln will come as a president of the USA, he is sympathetic to the black people and he will bring certain kind of reforms which the whites in these areas does not want. Understood? And therefore they have started American Civil War, and the southern states have formed their confederacy and have threatened that if Abraham Lincoln will come in power, then we will detach ourselves from the northern part of America. And what happened? That the Abraham Lincoln came in power. And we all know that Abraham Lincoln was very sympathetic to the black people. He has brought three different kinds of amendment. That is 13th Amendment, that is 14th Amendment, and 15th Amendment. Okay. Now, this 13th Amendment have abolished slavery, and this 14th Amendment gave citizenship rights to the black people, and this 15th Amendment gave them voting rights. Although they have not enjoyed their voting rights till 1965, because there was a certain kind of literacy test which they need to pass, and the test was made in such a way that they cannot pass. Understood? So this is basically an aftermath of Abraham Lincoln coming into the power. And this is a reconstruction phase, that what are the different kinds of emancipation proclamation done by Abraham Lincoln, that is 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Now what happened? That when the reconstruction phase, or when the rights to the blacks were being granted, it has infuriated the whites, and the white supremacists believe that this is not a good way, or this is not the way to give them rights, and therefore they have started brutality against the black people. So now what happened after reconstruction phase? That there were certain kind of groups, that is the red shirts and white league, but the most important was Ku Klux Klan group. Actually this group was practicing lynching of the black people, and you will be surprised to know that since from 1800 to 1950, at least 4,000 Afro Americans were lynched. And just we have talked about that the 15th, 13th, 14th Amendment has provided them rights, but that was not the right in the real sense, because this because some of the rights in the after reconstruction phase, just like Jim Crow law and the grandfather clause, inhibited them to practice the rights in the reality. So now we will look into that what happened in the after construction phase and what was that law. The important law was Jim Crow law and grandfather clause. Basically, this Jim Crow law talks about segregation of black people from the public places. And here the public places means schools, transport, and from everywhere, that is parks. This is the Jim Crow law. This was being practiced even after giving them voting rights and all the different kinds of the rights. And this grandfather clause says that whatever the new rights which is being granted to them, it will not be an exclusive right. It simply means that it cannot be practiced in all the circumstances. Okay, so basically this law inhibits the blacks to practice their rights in reality. So now after reconstruction phase, I have this, that is 1910 to 1970. What happened between this period 1910 and 1970? In between this, 1920 is called nadir of American whites brutality against the blacks. Okay, because there was a mass migration between 1910 to 1970, and even only in Chicago the population of the black people increased from 3.2 to 13 million, and therefore this has again frustrated the white people, and they become too much aggressive against the blacks. Now some incidents have happened in 1955, and that give rise to the civil rights movement by Martin Luther King. So we will go into the sequence wise understanding of the historical incidents which have happened at that time. So now the very first incident was of Rosa Parks. Actually, Rosa Parks was a lady who got seat in the Montgomery bus. Okay, basically this Montgomery is in the state of Alabama. She got the seat, but what happened that the white people entered the bus and asked the Rosa Parks to leave the seats, and she refused. And when she refused, she was arrested and put into the jail. And this has sparked the civil rights movement by Martin Luther King. Now, what happened? One incident which you should know that happened between 1910 to 1970, that is the incident of 1954. In 1954, Supreme Court of USA in Brown versus Board of Education had said that the black people should not be segregated at schools. Okay, this is the thing which you need to remember, and now I will relate this. So now in 1954, the Supreme Court has said that there should not be any segregation of the black students. Therefore, whether they are being segregated or not, they want to check it. And so Little Rock 9, these are the 9 black teens. Okay, they went to the Central High School of Alabama, and the guards refused them to enter. This has intensified the civil rights movement, that you are just giving us rights in not in totality but a symbolic rights you are giving to the black people. Again in 1957, a Civil Rights Act has come, and this act has talked about prosecution of white people if they prosecution of white people. Okay, why the prosecution of white people? Because these white people are creating obstacles for the black people in the southern states to practice their voting rights. Basically, these white people are doing literacy test, and that literacy test prohibited the blacks for exercising the voting rights, and therefore this Civil Rights Act has said that there will be a prosecution of such white people. Understood? After that, what happened 1963, and Martin Luther King has given a call for march to Washington, and in this march on Washington he has given a famous speech of I have a dream. Understood? In this speech, he has talked about equality for the black people. This is important to understand or to know so that you can put in your examination. So now, after that, what happened? Then the president, P. Lyndon B. Johnson, P. Lyndon B. Johnson came in power and became the president of USA. And he gave the Civil Rights Act, and this Civil Rights Act of 1964 talks about equal employment opportunities for the black people also. But there was certain flaw in this Civil Rights Act, because this Civil Rights Act have not scrapped the literacy test. These have not scrapped the literacy test. And after that, there was one incident of Bloody Sunday. What happened on this Sunday of 1965? That the people were protesting against the killing of black activist Jimmy Jackson. Actually, Jimmy Jackson was a black activist and he was killed in the police brutality, and the people were protesting and they were moving from Selma. Selma is a place in Montgomery, Selma to Montgomery. Okay, they were marching the protest. Montgomery and both are in the state of Alabama. Okay, after that, what happened? The police have stopped this crowd and started brutality against them, and most of the protesters were badly injured in this, and therefore it is termed as Bloody Sunday in the history of USA. Okay, so now after that, what happened in 1965? Voting rights were granted to the black people, and in this time they have scrapped the literacy test for the blacks. Okay, and we all know that in before 1968 or in 1968 there was an assassination of the Martin Luther King, and after that there was an important act, that is the Fair Housing Act of 1968 came. And this Fair Housing Act talks about that there should not be any kind of discrimination based on religion, based on sex, based on nationality. So basically this Fair Housing Act is the culmination of the end of racism in a theoretical sense and from the constitutional and political perspective. Whether this ban on the practice of racism is applied in the socio-economic aspect also or not, these are not applied in the social economic aspect, which is highlighted in the recent killing of George Floyd, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, and this has intensified after 2008 financial crisis, because 2008 financial crisis has reflected the already fractured socio-economic condition in USA. Okay, and the whites were demanding that they should be employed in the factory, they should be given more privilege against the blacks. So these are the kinds which are these are the certain kind of history which you can associate in your examination. So now these are all the ethical perspective of the racism. These are all historical perspective of the racism. Now we will come into ethical issues of the racism. Now the philosophical understanding of the racism can be understood from the two great philosophers, that is Immanuel Kant and Martha Nussbaum. Actually, Immanuel Kant is of the view that inherently human nature is not bad. Human nature is good according to Immanuel Kant, but what happened that the person who practiced racism, or the person who considered them as a superior, becomes immoral for the time being. And when the person becomes immoral, then he does not believe in the idea of equality. Okay. Similarly, Martha Nussbaum has done a study on the emotions, and Martha Nussbaum is of the view that when the person is practicing racism, basically he withholds his emotion of compassion. ये कहते हैं कि कंपैशन मर जाता है. इंसान जब रेसिज्म प्रैक्टिस करता है तो उसके अंदर का कंपैशन मर जाता है. तो दिस इज बेसिकली ए फिलोसफिकल अंडरस्टैंडिंग. आफ्टर दैट you should understand, or we should try to use the word or keyword used in our GS paper 4 syllabus. So now racism is based on the idea of discrimination, prejudice and stereotype. Understood? And when you are prejudice and stereotype, you are basically ignorant about the another person or another group of person. Whenever you are ignorant, then you will become intolerant against that person or the group of person. Whenever you are intolerant, then you will have the feeling of resentment against that particular person or group. Okay, resentment. And whenever you have a feeling of resentment, then you can go to any extent to harm the another group of person or another person. So basically this is the This is the basically content which you can use in examination whenever there is a question on ethical issues with racism. I hope you have enjoyed the entire video and it will give you a comprehensive understanding